Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, the United Nations celebrates World Press Freedom Day in Tunisia. Ben Ali has gone. The pressures on the media, however, remain. The Greek financial story, as explained by the Greek media. What's left of them, anyway. Why would the Bahraini foreign minister be such a big fan of this documentary about human rights in Sri Lanka?
This film contains very disturbing images.
It all makes a strange kind of sense. And big sky country, eyes turned to the stars in Chile. Our web video of the week. It's been almost a year and a half now since a small protest started in Tunisia that would go on to light a fire of revolt that would spread across North Africa and the Arab world. It was symbolic then that this past week the UN chose Tunisia as the focus for its annual World Press Freedom Day. A lot has changed since the fall of the Ben Ali government. An array of media outlets once devoted to serving a dictator has been supplemented by more than 100 new post-revolutionary options across print, radio, television, and the web. But it's not all good news or straight coverage of news. There's a battle underway. A growing Salafist movement is at odds with secular forces, and journalists often find themselves caught in the middle. Our starting point this week is the birthplace of the Arab Spring, Tunis, where the media war reflects in a microcosmic way the larger struggle for political power.
ونستهل جولتنا من حيث أفادت مصادر نقابية تونسية.
Weeks and weeks of protests by frustrated Tunisian citizens.
It was enough to bring down the government and force the nation's president to flee.
Tunisians taught the Arab world a lesson that other countries would follow when, armed with not much more than mobile phones and social media networks, they brought down the Ben Ali government. What they themselves have learned since then is that changing a government is one thing. Revolutionizing the media that regimes leave behind is quite another.
In the first weeks after the revolution, the expectations were really high. People expect change overnight. They wanted the best news. They wanted a maximum amount of space to express themselves. And the Tunisian media landscape at that time was definitely not ready for this.
There are too many hopes and too little time. You have two extremes here. Activists and bloggers and dissident journalists who wanted to topple the government, and former apparatchiks who are very happy with the status quo. And there isn't exactly the right kind of balance at the moment.
And now as we're transitioning into a government, etc., many people are finding out that you have still a lot of the elements of the old regime in place. And in fact, it created some sort of sectarian type of media, because now you have different parties jockeying for a place in the government.
Regardless of your religious beliefs, you've got to hand it to the news gods. They have a sense of irony.
3, 2, 1, action!
World Press Freedom Day fell on May 3rd, the same day a Tunisian court ruled on a freedom of expression case that brought opposing factions onto the streets and into open conflict. Nabil Karoui, a director at privately owned Nesma TV, was charged with broadcasting a film that disturbs public order and threatens proper morals. The film was Persepolis, an Academy Award-nominated Franco-Iranian production that included a visual depiction of God, which offended some Muslims.
What surrounded the trial in terms of media, in terms of people demonstrating in front of the court of justice, has triggered a lot of emotions. We feel that the conservatives versus liberals, the two groups have been in confrontation during this trial.
It's one episode on a series of trials put by lawyers having an Islamic background against media representatives. It's a very good reflection of the struggle between two visions of the new Tunisia, the secular Tunisia and the Islamist, more conservative Tunisia.
It could be looked at from different angles. One angle, did the station understand the audience? Nesma TV is located in the capital. The capital has always been the center of liberalism. However, it goes on satellite TV. And others in Tunisia would argue that maybe the new upcoming media is not in tune with the demands of the public. There is a force for self-censorship to forget about freedom of the press and adhere to the demands of the public.
The conservatives are sending a message saying that we're here and we will defend our rights. The liberals who are standing with Nabil Qarwi are also saying that we did this revolution for the freedom of speech and we want to keep it going. So I think everybody's sending a lot of messages in this question.
The message from the court was ambiguous. It found the defendant guilty, but issued only a small fine. Nesma TV and Hannibal TV are privately owned channels that have been joined on the air by new radio stations. Many of the new private outlets have been criticized for simply reflecting the political views of their owners. State-run television is now, at least nominally, under the control of the Ennahda movement, the Islamist party that won the most seats in last October's election. But Ennahda distrusts the journalists there for having served the Ben Ali regime for so long, and the feeling would appear to be mutual. The government found, or arranged for, support from Tunisian Islamists. They spent 8 weeks protesting in front of the state TV building, demanding a purge.
National state-run TV is becoming now a part of the political struggle between the new opposition and the new rulers of the country, the Ennahda government. In fact, demonstrators were calling for the purification of these TVs from what they are considered are as the remaining of the old regime. For the new opposition and also for a large part of the media community, this is an attempt by the new government to intimidate the state-run media and to use it again as a tool for propaganda for the new regime.
There's more room to breathe on Tunisian state-run television. Something they weren't accustomed to, but critics are not satisfied with that. They think it's not enough, and they'd like to have a wider margin for freedom.
But at the same time, you cannot go through purging every single person who worked during Ben Ali, and many of them will come and tell you, look, we were doing our job and we were forced at times to read press releases, but that's not where our sentiments lie. So it's a question of reform. Are people seeing reform happening quickly enough? We cannot expect miracles in a year or two, but I will take what's happening in Tunisia today, 100 times ahead of what was going on during Ben Ali.
That's Tunisia a little more than a year after the revolution. Reforming the media is a work in progress. This is not a united nation, but given what happened here, what started here, it was the right place to mark the UN's World Press Freedom Day. Our Global Village Voices now on the media in post-revolutionary Tunisia.
There is a lack of professionalism and of respect to the ethics of journalism in Tunisian media, and this is quite normal after decades of silence and of repression. Tunisian journalists need a lot of time. They also need training and, most importantly, laws that would protect them while doing their job.
If you ask me about the state media television, well, it's obvious to everyone it's not doing well. As a matter of fact, the entire system is not doing well. Mass media, politicians, security forces, Main Street, all of them are slacking reforms. So it's not fair to take on state television only when the entire system is slacking.
Our News Bites section this week reads like a catalog of reasons not to go into journalism. Foremost among them is that it can get you killed. Boko Haram, the Nigerian Islamist group, is widening its war against the country's media. At least 9 people died and many more were injured after twin attacks on the offices of an influential daily newspaper this day. In claiming responsibility for the bombings in Abuja and in the northern city of Kaduna, Boko Haram said it singled out the paper because of its so-called sins. The statement said, "We have repeatedly cautioned reporters and media houses to be professional and objective in their reports. This is a war between us and the government of Nigeria. Unfortunately, the media have not been objective and fair in their reports of the ongoing war. They chose to take sides." Boko Haram has already said that it was responsible for the killings of 2 journalists in the past year. Gunmen shot dead Zakaria Issa, a videographer for the state-run Nigerian Television Authority. In January, sect members killed Channel's television journalist Enenche Akogwu. There's been an escalation in the ongoing battle in Somalia between the Islamic militant group Al-Shabaab and the media there. Al-Shabaab has reportedly taken over a privately owned radio station called Radio Markabli, based in the southwestern part of the country. It's the latest step in an ongoing campaign by the group against Somali journalists trying to cover that story. Already this year, 4 reporters have been killed, and Somali authorities have accused the network of being behind the murders. The casualties include Hassan Osman Abdi of the Shabelle Media Network, Abukar Hassan Mahamoud of Somaliwane Radio, Mahad Salad Adan of Voice of Hiran Radio, and Ali Ahmed Abdi of Radio Galkayo. A Brazilian journalist who wrote critically about politicians has become the latest reporter to be killed there. In an attack described as clearly premeditated, Deciu Sá was shot dead in a bar in São Luís in northeastern Brazil. His death brings the number of journalists murdered in Brazil this year to 4 that we know of. Sá was 42 and worked at a local newspaper called O Estado do Maranhão. He also wrote a political blog, Blog do Deciu, that was known for its critical reporting on politicians and corruptions. On the day of his death, Sá reported on a murder allegedly ordered by a businessman from a well-known political family. On its website, Brazil's National Newspaper Association said Sá was killed because of his courageous coverage of crimes committed by hired gunmen, and that his killing highlights the pernicious effect of the impunity that surrounds attempts made against professionals who work to better inform citizens. Mexico is yet another country where your byline can cost you your life. The body of Regina Martinez was found in her apartment in the eastern state of Veracruz, one of Mexico's most notorious drug trafficking routes. Police said there were signs of torture. Martinez was a correspondent for the weekly news magazine Proceso, one of the country's oldest and most respected investigative publications. Mexico's never-ending cycle of drug-related violence has made it one of the world's most dangerous places to be a journalist. Since 2006, at least 40 reporters have been killed there. On a lighter note, supporters of the government in Bahrain have taken an unusual interest in a documentary about Sri Lanka. The Radio Times, a British weekly broadcasting magazine, has been hosting an unofficial poll asking its readers to vote in the current affairs category of the BAFTA Awards. The BAFTAs are annual awards for British television, where winners are decided by a jury.
This film contains very disturbing images.
Among the 4 nominees are a Channel 4 film called Sri Lanka's Killing Fields. It's up against Al Jazeera's documentary Bahrain Shouting in the Dark, a critical look at the Bahraini government's crackdown on anti-government protesters last year.
Where the Shia Muslim majority are ruled by a family from the Sunni minority.
In a clear attempt to try to influence the outcome, Bahrain's foreign minister Khalid al-Khalifa tweeted to his 80,000 followers urging them to vote against the Al Jazeera film. At last count, more than 100,000 people had voted in this category, compared to other categories that are only drawing a few hundred votes. There is no sign yet that the Sri Lankan government has mounted a similar campaign in favor of the film about Bahrain, but given Sri Lanka's past attempts to discredit the Channel 4 film, we certainly wouldn't put it past them. The media in Greece have had an election to cover, the country's first since the explosion of the financial crisis. Greek journalists haven't just been covering the economic story, they have found themselves part of it. Their industry is amongst the worst affected. Media outlets have been shut down. There have been big layoffs, and many of those who still have jobs are dealing with significant pay cuts. Of equal concern to Greek media consumers is the way the economic story is being reported. Media outlets owned by conglomerates have been accused of putting the corporate agendas of their paymasters ahead of journalistic considerations. Then there's the suggestion that alternative economic points of view do not get a fair hearing in the Greek media, unlike the bromides proposed by outside organizations such as the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. The Listening Post's Marcela Pizarro now from Athens on the story of the Greek media's own financial crisis and whether news outlets in the country that gave the world democracy are reflecting the concerns of the people or those of big business.
Greeks tuning into the news on April 4th were in for a surprise. Right in the middle of a political talk show, there was a food fight, Greek style. Protesters stormed the studios of Epiros TV, throwing yogurt at the host and his guest, a far-right politician. Greek media are suffering. The anti-austerity protests included chants against capitalist media and biased coverage of the financial crisis. Many Greek journalists cannot even call themselves part of the media anymore, like the employees at Alta TV. Having been paid for most of 2011, staff did not just go on strike. 6 months ago, they seized control of Alta TV's frequency and broadcast their pay demands. The channel went off the air. For the past 3 months, Alta TV's employees have camped out in the building, living off donations and cooking meals on what was once the set of a food show.
We hope that we will find our jobs again and that we get paid and that the employer gives us all our money, all the money that he owes us.
For the workers at Eleftherotypia, once Greece's most prominent left-leaning newspaper, there's almost no hope of their paychecks coming. Last August, the paper stopped paying wages and later it filed for bankruptcy. The staff came together and printed 2 editions of their own paper under the masthead Workers of Eleftherotypia. Dimitri Trimis, a veteran reporter at the paper, is now president of the Athens Journalists Union, the first one in the union's history to be out of work.
I worked at Eleftherotypia for 23 years, and now 800 of us have been left unemployed. The media sector in this country grew in a very irrational way. Banks, the economic and political elite were all linked to the media. So when the economic bubble burst, it had a series of adverse effects on the media industry.
Some of the effects began even before the layoffs and bankruptcies. In the 2 years of this crisis, coverage by the mainstream media has become an issue. Greece's huge debt, the measures to prevent a default, the austerity packages. Every element in this financial saga has been controversial, and the way that the Greek media have covered the story is part of the story.
Mainstream media are trying to bring chaos and panic to the population. They say that everything will collapse.
Θα έρθει το χάος. Η Ελλάδα θα κατρακυλήσει στον τρίτο κόσμο.
ATMs will not have money to give you.
Τα σενάρια που έχουν εκπονήσει Παύλο οι οικονομολόγοι για την επιστροφή στην δραχμή.
So you have to obey what the foreign financial institutions and what the government is saying.
Sky Television has taken the most stridently pro-austerity and reform line and has been in favour of liberalisation of the economy, the reduction in bureaucracy, many of the things that the troika of Greece's creditors is advocating that Greece implement.
The problem with the Greek media today is not just that thousands have been left out of work, it's also that democracy is on the line. The very same people who created this crisis insist today that they will overcome it. In reality, what they do is that they manipulate public opinion. They're matching the policies of the Troika and the IMF, and they control journalism.
Critics of Sky, one of Greece's largest media groups, point to the fact that the same family owns Kaikledes Shipping, and that these other business interests affect their news coverage. We spoke to Sky owner Yannis Alafousos, who disputes that idea.
Most media are not looking at the reality of the situation, that Greece messed up, that we have a huge amount of debt, that we are bankrupt, and that third parties had to impose rule on us because we couldn't do it ourselves. You know, when somebody goes bankrupt and their bank is willing to help them, you follow the demands of the bank.
That economic orthodoxy is not universally shared. Aris Chatzistefanou, a former Sky journalist, is one of its loudest critics. He was laid off a year ago because, he says, of the political views he aired on his radio show. His documentary, Debtocracy, did not help his case. It was a scathing critique of the dominant media narrative about what went wrong in Greece.
I think that we are living under a media dictatorship. When the media owners decide to fire thousands of employees, they can choose who they will fire. So they will choose to throw out the people that had an alternative point of view.
Chatzistefanou has taken Sky to court, but his former boss says the firing was not about freedom of expression, but about an employee being partisan.
I think that he's not right telling that he didn't have the opportunity and the freedom to do what he wanted to do, journalistically speaking. But came a point when he took a political stand. And by taking a political stand, it was a partisan way of seeing things. And then I think that the best way for both of us was to be separated.
With so many media outlets under financial pressure, new media alternatives have emerged, such as Unfollow and Mono magazines, set up by journalists sacked from their jobs. There's also Radio Bubble, a community web station. These new voices offer different perspectives and challenge existing market-driven forms of journalism.
All those who've been thrown out of the media should organize themselves and create their own experimental cooperatives, which can provide real information, as opposed to the directives coming from the elites who are selling austerity and authoritarianism.
People want to get this alternative perspective to the news, even when they disagree with what we are saying. So we are not saying that we are balanced, we are saying that we are bringing an alternative point of view.
Because in a country that gave the world democracy, there should be room for alternative points of view. They are out there, but Greeks in the market for thinking that comes from outside the mainstream will have to look somewhere other than their television screens to find it.
More Global Village voices now from the editors of Mono and Unfollow magazines about their alternative media projects in Greece.
Mono is a magazine funded by its contributors, independent of third parties. We represent a new generation of journalists which want to return to the fundamental principles of journalism and re-establish the connection of the press with the public.
The journalistic aim of Unfollow is to provide quality journalism that is nowadays impossible to provide in the mainstream media. We want to be in the center of journalism and information, because this is exactly the place where one can oppose the way that news has been written in this country for very many decades.
Finally, here at the Listening Post, we usually deal with cameras that are pointed forward at people or at each other. This week, we're focusing on the stars and not the celebrity kind. Two photographers recently spent some time camped out in the Atacama Desert in northern Chile. It's an area, an environment known for its clear, dry skies and an absence of artificial light. In short, it's an astronomer's paradise, which is why it's also home to one of the world's most advanced observatory centers. Over 2 months, the photographers took more than 7,500 still shots and turned them into a stirring video, a celestial light show. Bringing the skies over Atacama, Chile to life is our web video of the week. We'll see you next time at The Listening Post.